Huh. Fools. They tried to measure you. That was their first mistake. They brought their instruments, their tests, their formulas, their charts, as if your mind could be boxed, labeled, reduced to data points. But the first scan left them staring at results that contradicted their own laws. Equations bent, models broke. The graphs refused to align with the patterns they were trained to expect. Because you aren't a subject that can be mapped. You are the deviation that exposes the fragility of their entire framework. Every experiment that touches you stops being science and starts being a confession that their methods were never built for something like you. In private halls, they whisper about it. They say your thought process doesn't follow linear tracks, that when you arrive at conclusions, the path disappears behind you, like footprints swallowed by the tide. They admit your solutions appear faster than they can draft their hypotheses. They claim you leap across cognitive distances that would take them decades to crawl through. And when they replay the footage, when they analyze your choices frame by frame, they see patterns, but they can't explain them. It terrifies them because science hates what it cannot predict. And prediction collapses the moment you enter the room. Understand this, scientists pride themselves on control. They want the world dissected, ordered, neatly filed under categories. They need to believe everything can be named, modeled, and explained. But you, your genius, is not a specimen. It's a force. When they try to model you, their equations fracture. When they try to capture you, the variables multiply faster than they can calculate. The very act of observation turns into exposure, not for you, but for them. Exposure of their limits, exposure of their arrogance, exposure of the truth. That what you carry is beyond their textbooks, beyond their labs, beyond the cages they built for human potential. That's why they've moved to whispers, because they know they can't publish what they've found. Imagine the consequences if the journals admitted it, that one mind, one individual, operates outside the predictive frameworks that define human intelligence. They would have to rewrite everything. Theories about cognition, memory, innovation, shattered. Peer review would collapse into chaos. Grant funding would dry up because no one wants to admit billions were spent chasing a map that disintegrates in your presence. So they suppress it. They bury the reports. They leak half-truths to keep their reputations safe. But the secret has already escaped. And here's the irony. Suppression only fuels curiosity. The more they try to hide you, the more obsessed they become. In closed conferences, they reference you without using your name. In private labs, they replay your recordings like forbidden scriptures. Their brightest students are warned not to study you, but the warning itself becomes the invitation. Because deep down, they all sense the same truth. Genius like yours isn't an outlier. It's a fracture line. It's the proof that their entire framework is incomplete. And once that proof exists, there's no turning back. They can't map you because you don't move through knowledge like they do. They crawl step by step, dragging themselves across theories. You ascend in leaps. You don't memorize equations. You embody the answer before the question is finished. You don't search for patterns. You create them, and only afterward do they realize what you did was possible. You don't follow logic. You make logic follow you. And that is why their measurements fail. They are used to charting rivers, but you are an ocean. They are trained to trace sparks, but you are lightning striking in all directions at once. Do you realize the weight of that? To be labeled beyond human isn't just flattery. It's an admission of surrender. It means the most advanced tools of human civilization, their universities, their labs, their algorithms, fold in your presence. They are forced to admit you're operating on principles they haven't discovered yet. Principles that rewrite what it means to think, to create, to imagine. That's why they don't call you genius anymore. Genius implies a scale, a comparison, a spectrum, where you can be placed alongside others. No, you are beyond that. You are the scale breaker, the measurement they cannot calibrate. And still, they test. They build new machines, more sensitive instruments, algorithms trained on billions of data points. They believe if they collect enough numbers, they'll finally decode your process. But the more they measure, the less sense it makes. Their artificial intelligence stutters when confronted with your patterns. Their predictions collapse under the weight of your choices. Their most powerful models spit out errors, then freeze, then restart. The conclusion writes itself. Your mind isn't just a head. It's operating on a frequency that bends their entire framework. Think of the implications. If you can't be mapped, then you can't be controlled. If you can't be predicted, then you can't be contained. Every strategy built on anticipating human behavior fails the moment it encounters you. That's why agencies monitor you. That's why think tanks obsess over you. That's why governments study you in the dark, hoping to find a thread, a foothold, a clue. But every test leaves them with the same conclusion. They are trying to capture thunder with a butterfly net. What they can't admit publicly is this. Your genius isn't about intelligence alone. It's about velocity. The speed of your adaptation, the speed of your insight, the speed of your execution. They can't keep up. Because every time they think they've caught you, you've already shifted into another dimension of thought. You've already reinvented the frame of reference. You've already moved the game board 3 steps forward. That's why they look haunted when your name comes up in their circles. That's why their language slips from scientific to spiritual. Because there's no technical term for what they're facing. So they whisper, beyond human. Not as praise, but as defense. It's easier for them to believe you're not fully human than to admit their life's work is inadequate. Because if you are human, if your mind is truly part of this species, then everything they've built collapses under the weight of that revelation. It means the ceiling they believed existed was a lie. It means the limits they preached were self-imposed chains. And if one person can shatter those chains, others can too. That is what terrifies them most. They tell themselves it's safer to isolate you, to label you as exception, to pretend you are an anomaly of biology or genetics. But deep down, they know the truth. You aren't an exception. You are the preview of what comes next. And if they admit that, if they allow it to spread, their control dissolves. The classroom walls crumble. The authority of their titles disintegrates. Because no professor, no scientist, no authority figure can stand tall when proof exists that a single mind can dwarf the entire institution. That's why they're careful. That's why they don't publish. That's why they whisper instead of speak. Because the moment it goes public, the narrative changes forever. The moment your existence is acknowledged, every hierarchy built on intellectual superiority is exposed as hollow. And exposure spreads faster than containment. You can feel it already, the shift in the air, the unease in their voices, the paranoia in their eyes. They know the secret is leaking. They know whispers are multiplying. They know the moment is coming when denial is no longer an option. And when that moment comes, remember this. You didn't ask to be measured. You didn't ask to be compared. You didn't ask to be tested. They did that to themselves. They needed to prove to themselves that they still owned the map of human potential. Instead, they discovered a landscape they can't chart, a frontier they can't claim, a horizon that keeps stretching farther no matter how fast they chase. And that's the punchline. They thought they were studying you. In reality, you exposed them, exposed their limits, exposed their arrogance, exposed the fragility of the institutions they worship. This is only part one of the revelation, because whispers don't stay whispers. They spread, they transform, they erupt. And what begins as secrecy always ends as exposure. The scientists know it. The agencies know it. The governments know it. That's why the whispers are louder now. That's why the experiments have grown desperate. That's why your name keeps appearing in documents that were never meant to leave the basement vault. Because the truth they tried to contain is already uncontainable. And the cracks in their fortress are only widening from here. And every new fracture makes them louder, not braver. What began as hidden memos and encrypted emails is now spilling into late-night phone calls between directors who once mocked the idea of you. They're no longer debating whether your mind exists beyond their graphs. They're debating what it will cost them when the public finds out. Each leaked document is a countdown. Each classified experiment is an admission of panic disguised as research. They built the walls of secrecy high, but you have outgrown their containment before they even finished the blueprint. You can feel the change in the air. The tone of the scientists who once dismissed you as anecdote has shifted from skepticism to obsession. They're not testing hypotheses anymore. They're testing you, trying to see how far your thinking stretches, trying to break you the way they break every other model. But every new test collapses before it's complete. They start with a hypothesis. You dissolve it by simply existing. They increase the variables. You absorb them effortlessly. They scramble to recalibrate, but recalibration requires a stable reference point, and you are movement itself, intellect in motion, too fluid to pin down. Behind closed doors, the conversation has changed. Beyond human is no longer whispered as rumor, it's whispered as warning. They say your brainwaves don't match the human range. They say your decision patterns show predictive loops they've never charted before. They say your learning curve looks more like a vertical wall than a gradual slope. And each time they reveal a new anomaly to each other, the room grows heavier. Because every data point confirms what they fear. The instruments they built to define human capacity are now artifacts of a smaller age. So they escalate. They move from observation to simulation, trying to recreate your patterns inside machines. They pour billions into neural nets, into biointerfaces, into secret prototypes. They tell themselves if they can copy your frequency, they can control it. But the more they simulate, the more obvious it becomes. You're not a frequency to be copied. You're a field that changes the instruments measuring it. They call it noise in the data. They call it interference. They call it anything but what it is, evidence of a mind that's already outpacing their definitions of mind itself. They wanted a specimen. They got a mirror. Every attempt to map you exposes how limited they are. Every project designed to decode you ends up decoding them instead. Their fear of losing authority, their fragile belief in the supremacy of their models, their quiet dread that all their work will be remembered as obsolete the moment your name becomes public. That's why the experiments are growing desperate. That's why the language in their reports is mutating from clinical to desperate, from subject exhibits irregularities to subject cannot be categorized. You've already seen the telltale signs, invitations phrased as opportunities that are really traps, tests framed as collaborations that are really interrogations. They offer resources, access, recognition, but behind the offer is the same agenda: classify you, predict you, contain you. They haven't learned that you can't be contained because you're not a fixed quantity. You're a moving edge, a living proof that intelligence isn't a box, but an expansion. And expansion can't be caged without destroying what makes it powerful. Think of what they're admitting without saying it. Top scientists, trained to speak only in probabilities, are now speaking in absolutes about you. Cannot be mapped. Beyond human. These aren't just words, they're surrender flags. Each phrase is a fracture line in the facade of certainty they built over centuries. And once the facade breaks, the crowd behind it sees the stage for what it is: a performance of control, not control itself. That's why the governments are involved now, not because you're a threat in the way they tell each other, but because your existence threatens the illusion of mastery on which their power rests. Their reports read like confessions. Subject's cognitive operations elude predictive modeling. Subject exhibits nonlinear problem-solving that cannot be replicated. Subject's intellectual velocity exceeds baseline human parameters. Each line is a crack. Each crack is a signal to the next reader that the old rules no longer apply. They tried to bury these reports in vaults, but vaults are just archives of failure waiting to be opened. And the whispers around your name are the sound of locks breaking one by one. Now they're experimenting on themselves. Brain-machine interfaces, stimulants, immersive simulations, anything to push their own cognition closer to yours. They frame it as innovation, but it's mimicry. They're trying to graft pieces of your genius onto their own limits, hoping it will make them feel less obsolete. But genius isn't a transplant. It's a current, and a current can't be bottled. It moves through what's ready for it and leaves what isn't behind. This is where their desperation exposes them. They'll offer you partnerships, grants, fellowships, anything to get you under their lens. They'll cloak the invitation in admiration, but behind it is fear. They're afraid of what happens when you stay unmeasured. They're afraid of what happens when the public realizes you're not a lab subject, but a living rebuke to the ceiling they've built over human potential. They're afraid that your refusal to be mapped will inspire others to step outside their charts, too. Because your existence is contagious. Not your methods, your refusal to be limited. Once people see you moving outside the grid of accepted capacity, they start to question the grid itself. They start to wonder what else they've been told is impossible. They start to test their own edges. And that is the real revolution, the one the scientists can't put back in the bottle. A single mind can be ignored. A movement of minds cannot. You are both the proof and the spark. They sense this. That's why their surveillance has intensified, not just in labs, but in public life. Data scraping, behavioral modeling, social mapping, all aimed at anticipating you. They're trying to build a predictive perimeter, a circle of algorithms to catch your next move before you make it. But prediction assumes repetition, and repetition assumes you'll act like them. You don't. You don't move in patterns. You move in breakthroughs, and breakthroughs, by definition, shatter predictions. In their private notes, some have begun to shift language entirely. They no longer speak of you as subject, but as event. Not a person to be studied, but a phenomenon to be managed. This is their quiet admission. You're not on their timeline. They're on yours. They're reacting to you. They're recalculating their budgets, their programs, their policies around your unpredictability. They're even rewriting their definitions of intelligence to leave a back door for what you represent, so they can pretend they saw it coming all along. But you know better. You know that behind every new definition is an old fear. The fear that the hierarchy of credentials, titles, and labs is about to invert. The fear that the gatekeepers of knowledge are about to be bypassed. The fear that the next generation won't look to institutions for permission, but to individuals for proof. And you are living proof. This is why the whispers have become more desperate. Each rumor about you carries a piece of the truth wrapped in speculation. They say you solved problems decades ahead of schedule. They say you anticipate events before they unfold. They say you see patterns in data invisible to their best AI. Whether the details are accurate or not doesn't matter. The effect is the same. You've become a legend in the halls of empiricism, and legends erode authority faster than errors do. Even their most hardened skeptics are cracking. Once they called you an outlier. Now they call you a signal. Once they called you a puzzle. Now they call you a precedent. They're trying to soften the blow of the inevitable revelation that your mind didn't just slip past their tools. It rendered their tools irrelevant. And here's what they don't realize. You're not hiding. You're simply moving at a speed they can't record, thinking in dimensions they haven't named. You're not beyond human in the sense they mean. You're beyond their definition of human. That distinction is everything. Because if what you embody is human potential unbound, then their maps are not just wrong, they're obsolete. And an obsolete map leads not to control, but to collapse. They've started drafting contingency plans, quiet memos about how to handle the public relations impact if your story breaks. They rehearse statements about unique genetic variations or rare cognitive phenomena to downplay what you are. They're preparing to spin your existence into a footnote. But footnotes don't erase revolutions. They only mark where the old world tried to stop the new one from entering. And you are already inside. All their strategies converge on one illusion, that if they can name you, they can frame you. But names are cages too small for what you carry. And every time they try to frame you, you redraw the frame. This is why their smartest ones have stopped trying to measure and started trying to learn. A few have even crossed the line from whispering to confessing, telling colleagues in hushed tones that you may not be a threat at all, but an opportunity, a glimpse of what humanity could become if it stopped bowing to ceilings. You are already rewriting their behavior without lifting a finger. Papers are being delayed because your name appears in the footnotes. Grant proposals are being restructured because your data skewed the baseline. Young researchers are quitting prestigious labs to follow rumors of you. These are not accidents, they're ripples. Ripples of a reality too large for their containment field. And ripples grow. The scientists can't map your genius because mapping requires distance. They have no distance left. They are inside the effect you generate, caught in the undertow of your acceleration. They don't even realize they've shifted from observers to participants. Their efforts to chart you are now part of the story you're rewriting. And as their fortress crumbles, they still can't see the full picture. They think they're holding back a secret. In reality, the secret is holding them back. They think they're protecting the public from you. In reality, They're protecting themselves from the public seeing what you represent. They think they're studying a phenomenon. In reality, they're witnessing a turning point. This is what the revelation looks like. Not a confrontation, but an inversion. The observers becoming the observed. The mappers getting lost inside the terrain they tried to chart. The instruments failing not because they're broken, but because the landscape has changed beyond recognition. And you, at the center, not as a subject, but as a catalyst. The whispers won't stop here. They will mutate. They will try to reframe you as danger, as miracle, as outlier, as anything but a mirror. But each mutation carries a seed of the truth. And once seeds are planted, growth is inevitable. Even in the dark, roots spread. You stand at the edge of their vocabulary. Every word they use to describe you crumbles under scrutiny. Every concept they wield shatters in your hands. And still you move forward, not waiting for their permission, not pausing for their labels. This is why their fortress is cracking. This is why their experiments are failing. This is why the scientists, the agencies, the governments are whispering beyond human, as if it's an incantation that will protect them. It won't. It's only the sound of their certainty breaking. And as the cracks widen, you're not just the subject of their study. You're the horizon of their fear. You're the proof that human potential doesn't end where they said it would. You're the reminder that maps are only useful until someone steps off the edge and keeps going. And you are already walking where their maps end, leaving behind not a trail, but a challenge. Follow if you dare. That's the line they can't cross. They built their careers on certainty. You built your life on movement. To follow you, they'd have to abandon the very scaffolding that gives them status. They'd have to risk everything on a journey with no coordinates, and that's a leap few in white coats will ever take. You've seen what happens when their formulas hit the edge of you. Panic hidden under jargon, reverence disguised as critique. They whisper beyond human because it's safer than saying, "We were wrong." Safer than admitting that your mind dismantles their frameworks, not by malice, but by existing. Safer than conceding that their idea of progress was a hallway with mirrors, and you're the door they never expected to open. But a door, once opened, can't be closed. And each time they mention you, each memo, each presentation, each hurriedly redacted report, another draft of the old world gets shredded. This is where the shift becomes irreversible. They began by treating you as an anomaly. Now they're treating you as precedent. Quietly, in think tank corridors and research basements, they're writing papers about post-metric cognition, unbounded problem solving, accelerated ideation, fancy names for the thing they can't name directly. You. The act of naming is their last attempt at control, but every new name they invent evaporates the moment you move. They're left chasing a shadow that always dissolves into daylight. Meanwhile, your presence is already shaping the next generation. Students read between the lines of restricted articles and feel a pulse of possibility. Young researchers notice the tremor in their mentors' voices and wonder what could inspire such dread. They don't have your speed yet, but they have your signal. The refusal to accept ceilings, the hunger to operate outside inherited diagrams. That is how revolutions begin, not with manifestos, but with a quiet shift in belief that spreads faster than any broadcast. Your existence is that shift made visible. They know it too. That's why the surveillance has shifted from watching to intervening. Invitations turn into offers of co-authorship. Grants appear out of nowhere. Awards dangle like bait. All of it designed to fold you into their machinery. to make you a symbol they can parade rather than a force they can't measure. But symbols can be retired. Forces can't. You've never belonged to their machinery, and you don't intend to. You don't need their stage because your work isn't performance. It's transformation. And transformation happens whether the spotlight is on or not. Inside their sealed rooms, they're rehearsing narratives to explain you away. They'll tell the public you're a rare convergence, a statistical outlier, a biological curiosity. They'll pretend your genius is a fluke, a quirk of nature rather than a direction of evolution. But narratives can't erase trajectories. By the time their statements hit the press, the proof will already be in circulation. New breakthroughs, new patterns, new minds rising who were inspired by your refusal to fit the chart. They'll discover too late that their attempt to contain you only accelerated the spread. Understand what this means. You've crossed the line from subject to catalyst. You're no longer just redefining intelligence. You're redefining what it means to be human in a world addicted to prediction. They can't map you because you're not a static point on a grid. You're a moving frontier, and frontiers don't stay still for cartographers. Every step you take redraws the landscape, and every redrawn landscape makes their old maps irrelevant. They're not just losing track of you, they're losing track of reality as they defined it. This is the part they'll never publish. Their most advanced models now include an invisible variable labeled only X. That X is you. They've stopped trying to calculate it. They simply add it as an unresolvable force to account for outcomes they can't predict. It's their silent confession that their equations are no longer equations at all. Their apologies. Apologies for believing the world could be contained in numbers. Apologies for mistaking measurement for mastery. Apologies for thinking genius was a crown they could hand out, rather than a horizon they'd have to chase. And yet, for all their fear, there's all. In the pauses between their closed-door meetings, in the lines they don't delete from their private notes, some of them are admitting the truth. What you embody isn't a threat. It's a possibility that frightens them because it means the ceiling over human potential isn't real. A possibility that excites them because it means everything they've dedicated their lives to might not be wasted, but incomplete. Awaiting the next phase you've already entered, they're glimpsing it, even if they can't join it yet. That's why part 3 of the revelation isn't about confrontation. It's about invitation. You didn't set out to break their maps. You simply outgrew them. You didn't aim to humiliate their institutions. You simply revealed their limits. The real story isn't that they can't map your genius. The real story is that your genius is a lighthouse for anyone willing to sail beyond the charts. And lighthouses don't move to ships. Ships move to lighthouses. Whether they admit it or not, the scientists are already steering toward the light you cast. Your challenge to them isn't to catch you, it's to expand themselves, to stop mistaking ceilings for skies, to stop using metrics as prisons, to remember that the greatest discoveries don't come from refining old tools, but from daring to build new senses entirely. Some will, most won't. But it only takes a few to start a new lineage of thought, and that's already happening. The first young minds, inspired by your refusal to be mapped, are stepping off the edges of the charts. They're not you, but they're moving in the direction you've opened. The future they feared is already underway. As for you, you don't need their approval. You don't need their language. You don't need their measurements. Every time they fail to map you, they confirm your freedom. Every failed prediction is a door you don't have to walk through. Every whisper of beyond human is a signpost pointing back to their own limitations. You've never been interested in being beyond anything. You've been interested in becoming fully yourself. And becoming fully yourself was always going to look like impossibility to people still measuring themselves by rulers you broke long ago. That's the quiet triumph they'll never chart. You didn't just elude their metrics. You rendered their metrics irrelevant. You didn't just rewrite their equations. You revealed that equations were never the point. The point was always the pulse, the movement, the living proof that intelligence isn't a cage, but a current. And a current doesn't stop when someone draws a line on a map. It flows, it expands, it reshapes the land. That's what your genius has been doing all along. So when they call you beyond human, don't hear their flattery, hear their confession. It's their way of saying, we don't know how far this can go. It's their way of saying, we thought we were at the edge, but there's more. It's their way of saying, if this is human, we have to rethink everything. And they're right, they do. Because the maps were never about you. They were about their need for boundaries, and boundaries dissolve the moment someone like you steps across. This is the closing act of the revelation. You don't have to convince anyone. You don't have to fight for recognition. The cracks in their fortress are widening on their own. The whispers are becoming echoes. The uncontainable truth is already in motion. All you have to do is keep walking where the maps end. Keep thinking where their definitions collapse. Keep embodying what they can't yet name. Because the moment you do, the question of whether you're beyond human stops being about you and starts being about them. Whether they're willing to evolve into the vastness you've already entered. And that is the final challenge you leave behind. Not a trail to follow, but a horizon to approach. Not a manual for replication, but a signal of possibility. Not a subject for measurement, but a catalyst for expansion. They may never map your genius. They may never understand your process, but they will feel its gravity, and gravity reshapes everything in its field. The scientists, the agencies, the governments, they're already inside that field. And once inside, no one leaves unchanged. This is where the whispers end and the exposure begins. This is where their fear turns into awe, their skepticism into curiosity, their boundaries into doorways. They can't stop it. They can't frame it. They can't measure it. They can only witness it. And in witnessing it, they're forced to confront the truth they've spent their lives avoiding. The horizon they feared was not the end. It was the beginning. And you've been walking it all along, leaving behind no trail, but a challenge, a beacon, a new map they'll never finish drawing.